Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Just Because Wrestling. And we have a very special guest this week. It is none other than Alex McCarthey of TalkSport. Alex, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me on, fellas. My Irish roots are loving this chat already.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you on. You know, you're obviously, a very illustrious guest, a great mind for the sport, and it's a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
I'm delighted, mate. Thank you very much. I always like to, I haven't had a chance to do many of these podcasts recently, just because my schedule's been so ridiculous. So it's going to be nice, refreshing. Instead of me being dictating everything, here we are. I'm a guest now. That's great.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you. Was like, is it strange for you being on the other end and being the person being interviewed more so than the person actually conducting the interview?
Yeah. You know what? Like, and I'm sure you guys have, once you get the reps in and the more people you interview, you realise, right? Like, you kind of work on your craft as you go. And I do think doing it more and more with anything in life, generally, is basically how you get there. So it is always kind of nice to actually be on the other end of it, because I do think that's a cool thing as well. Like, what kind of questions, do you know what I mean, work and what don't. So
yeah.
But yeah, I've been so focused for so long on just trying to be the best interviewer I can be that. But it all changes, man. Like, because when you host a radio show or like, a YouTube show, which I do as well, even those two things are different.
Yeah.
So like, to a podcast, anything like that. So one day people will realise that it's a skill for guys like us.
It'll be something transferable to put on your CV, like.
Yeah.
But, like, I've had it on my CV now for 4 years, and I don't think it's ever once come up in a job interview.
It always comes up in my interviews, to be fair. I always, but see, you're.
I work in a Nando's.
Yeah. See, mine are marketing interviews, so I can twist it a bit more and say, "Oh, I've marketed this podcast and all this, like it's experience along that way." So, it's beneficial anyway. But starting off, Alex, I suppose getting into how you got into wrestling. Could you talk to us a bit about that, and more so than how you ended up where you are in TalkSport?
I mean, I'm gonna have to give you the shortish version, because I mean, in terms of getting into wrestling, I mean, anyone my age, I'm 32 now. The Attitude Era was like prime. So I was 12, I think, in turn of the millennium. Obviously, that's when the Attitude Era is like in full flow. The Rock, Austin, all that lot. Like, you couldn't escape it if you wanted to. Like, when you was in school, everyone knew about that. Everyone knew about wrestling. It was red hot. So kind of getting it from my friends and stuff, but my mum and anyone else really didn't really want me to watch it, obviously, because the Attitude Era, and we all know what that was like. But my gran loved it, weirdly, and she was like a big Rock fan. So was I. Like, we were both hooked on the Rock. And that was like our bonding thing. I would stay there Friday nights, watch Raw. SmackDown used to be on like 11 o'clock, Sky 1. So weird. On a Saturday morning. So you would watch both of them, even though I didn't even know this back then, right? That like Raw wasn't on a Friday. I realised it was happening on Monday, and I wasn't getting it till Friday. I didn't even know that. So like, obviously that's just the way the schedule was then. And then my gran would tape the pay-per-views for me. I'd watch them like before or after school on the Monday and stuff. So that was just like our routine. Like, we loved it. But at the other end of the spectrum, like my granddad, he was like super articulate man. Like, he used to fascinate me just the way he spoke. Do you know what I mean? Like, say words and you'd just be like, what the hell? And I was so fascinated with him. He was just like a really intelligent guy. And I spent the vast majority of my childhood with them. My dad left when I was very young, and my mum then, through having to work and stuff. So I just spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And I'm glad, it's crazy now to think that I'm writing about, that's kind of my granddad's side, and the wrestling side from my gran. That's kind of brought me to where I am today. But yeah, into the career, like, I went to university and college and stuff, and I didn't get the work experience at university. Like, I totally miscalculated how valuable that would be. I don't need to tell you what I was doing at university, but when I came out of that, I kind of wallowed for a few years. Then I went to college to get another qualification, which it's an NCTJ. It basically means you can work for newspapers and stuff. And then that's where I got the experience that I needed to kind of get going. But even then, I thought I'm going to write about football. Like football was like my first love, right? And I thought, I'll that's what I want to do. And I started working for Give Me Sport. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're like got like 25 million followers on Facebook and stuff. Like that was our bread and butter. But I actually got a job there as an NBA writer. I do like the NBA, obviously, but I mean, it was kind of one of them things of just trying to find a way in. And then gradually, I just became more influential in that company. I was writing about more US sports, and I always said to them, like, I like wrestling. Like, if there's any openings there, and then I ended up, I think 2K offered them an interview with Sheamus, which I took for them, and I did one in the flesh with the Big Show, who was my actual first one. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. Like the clicks were like great, and then obviously sport were like, whoa, hang on, like maybe we could do something more with this. And then after maybe a year, the CEO of Gimme Sport was just like, you should just do wrestling. And I was like, yeah, I should. That was awesome. And I did that for about a year as well. But then going to cover like WrestleManias and SummerSlams, you meet people, right? And there was somebody there who worked for the Sun, and the Sun share an office, a building with TalkSport, because they're all under the same umbrella, the company. And TalkSport ended up recruiting to try and expand their website. They'd never touched wrestling. And this guy, unbeknownst to me, had kind of recommended me. And then TalkSport approached me. So, imagine my surprise, thinking, whoa, what's going on here? And then, pay rise, bigger job. What are you going to do? So I said yes. And I've been there for 2 years and 3 months now. So it's just been... everything is kind of circumstantial, but it's also chance and luck and working hard and stuff. And, like in the first year that we were there at TalkSport, I say this stat all the time, but before I joined, I think they had like under 30,000 clicks in like a year for wrestling. And then we had, I think it was 14 million the first year. So again, imagine that, like the revenue that generates in terms of ads and stuff. TalkSport were like, whoa. And then at the end of that first year, so January 2020, they launched the radio show that I now have, which they hadn't had in like 2 decades. So it's just gone from strength to strength, man. And I honestly think there's lots more we can do as well, but it's just been a blast. Like at TalkSport, I do more than wrestling. Like as I was saying to you earlier, I've been covering UFC all this morning. Marvin Hagler died in the boxing world, so like those combat sports. US sports are all kind of mine. That's what I preside over, but that's number one to me. Passion.
I totally get what you mean as well. Like, because wrestling has been something that has kind of like in my life won't go away. Do you know what I mean? Like, it I got into wrestling when I was like 3, literally. Like from my earliest memories. I got into it. And Jack as well got into it during the Ruthless Aggression era, because that's just our age. And like I remember a period of my life. So it was literally from 2001, 2002 to about 2007, 2008. I was obsessed with wrestling, and there was like brief periods where there was like it was basketball. I was obsessed with basketball, and I started playing basketball and stuff. I always had like. I always watched soccer. I always watched, hurling and football here in Ireland. Like, and like it got, and then around 2007, 2008, just at the age I was as well, I suppose, I was just like, wrestling sucks. Wrestling's losers. And I just stopped watching. I don't know what it was. There was no singular moment that made me go, nah, can't watch this anymore. I just stopped watching.
I did have a singular moment, and I'll get into it. My singular moment was when Jack Swagger won the Money in the Bank in 2010. In WrestleMania 26.
I came back for that.
See, I don't know why, because I really like Jake Hager now, and I feel bad for saying it, but like when he won it, I just hated Jack Swagger for some reason. I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm not watching this anymore.
Yeah, I remember that a little bit, like when The Rock left, because that's how big my fandom was of The Rock back then. And obviously he was like dipping in and out, kind of like 2002 to 2004. And then Lesnar come along. I hated Lesnar. That's weird to think now.
I love Lesnar.
I hated it. I was like, this big freak, get out! Where's The Rock? And Austin had left then as well. So like all the people that you adored, do you know what I mean? They just started to go, and I just thought, it was very difficult to kind of stick with it. But I think I started watching again in like 2007, like just because I went to uni and my friend had it. You know, in halls it's hard to, so like having wrestling was a cool thing. And that's when DX had like reunited and, Orton and Edge and people like that. And I was like, okay, like, I was into it again. And then when I left uni, I fell away again just because I didn't have Sky back at home. And I just couldn't be, it wasn't as easy as it is now where you can just log on to Twitter and be like, oh, what's happened or whatever. Like, I just went, whatever then. And then once I got Sky, I got back into it in about 2011. I remember going to my friend's house and I saw Daniel Bryan wrestle. I was like, who is that? Like, I didn't know anything about him, right? Any of this Ring of Honor stuff, what an independent legend he was. I just watched him wrestle and he looked so ordinary.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, he just had when he was really short, had a buzz cut. And that was it, really. And I was just like, oh, well, who's this guy? And I watched him wrestle and I was like, whoa, he's like so good. To my friend, like, who the hell is that? And he was like, oh, Daniel Bryan. Like, there's a whole load of guys like that now. I was like, oh, all right. And then that kind of got me back in. Obviously, I retrospectively, thanks to the network and BitTorrent at the time, I went back and watched all the Raws and stuff that I missed.
Yeah.
It's weird to think that I've pretty much missed out on, because 2004 to 2006 is like I think there's some good stuff in there. Like, well, I know it's dirty to say it now, but like Benoit, obviously, Guerrero and Rey Mysterio and stuff like that. So, weird. It is weird, the phases of it. But since 2011, I've been like lock solid, basically.
Yeah. That's
you mentioned Lesnar there. Have you ever had the opportunity to interview him or Heyman?
No, can I swear on this thing?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, work with it.
I was about to go, fuck no. No, I have had Heyman.
Yeah.
Which is like.
Exactly. Have you mentioned that you hated Lesnar growing up?
No, I don't hate Lesnar. Let's make that clear. I think he's elite now. I love it.
Yeah.
It was just then that I was just like, who is this guy? Like, I didn't really. I think I was just so like, did you like down on Rock being gone? I was just like, whoever the next guy was, I was like, he sucks. Yeah. But yeah, of course he was a phenomenon looking back on it, and I still think now he's actually one of the most underappreciated guys. In the business, one of the elite sellers, and I mean, I've seen some of his interviews with guys. I don't know if I want to be in that firing line. Like, Heyman was difficult enough to navigate. Seriously, he was great, but hard.
Heyman seems like he goes in with an idea of where the interview is going, and not the other way around.
Yeah, you try and get something out of him, you're in for a tough one.
It's tough anyway, like interviewing anyone kind of under contract with WWE and stuff, because I'd imagine there's a lot of things they can't disclose. There's a lot of things they can't fully get into, and you're kind of you then as the interviewer are kind of wary of what you're asking. If you're gonna get, like, is there a point in even asking a question? Are you gonna get a proper answer? Like, are they gonna answer it in kayfabe? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean the kayfabe aspect of it fucking sucks. Like when you're doing an interview with someone, a recent example for me is Don Callis.
I was going to say that. Were you in that media call? You were?
No, I did a one-on-one with him after that. And it was literally just after, literally days after they did the thing where Kenny won the title, right? Yeah. So what a great time to get him. But it sucked because he just so kayfabe. He didn't give me anything really to work on. And I always think that's just like, I get it. Sometimes if your line of questioning is so backstage or whatever, or invasive in that way, and they don't want to give up everything, they have to find ways around what you're saying. And some of them are like masterful at it. Triple H in particular, by the way, like he will masterfully dance around what you're asking him. But a lot of them are open to it. A lot of them have got stuff they want to say. Like, they want to talk about how great some of the stuff is. It all depends on what you're asking. I find, like AJ Styles, I had him before the end of last year. I'd say it's one of my best. Like, he literally answered everything I asked him in terms of, like, the Undertaker stuff or who he's lobbying for at WrestleMania. Like, he did not have a problem with opening up. And sometimes that's the case, but it is definitely a challenge depending on who you get and what version of them you get. Like, I've had superstars as well where I've had them on like a press junket at like 7:30 in the morning in America on pay-per-view weekend, and then I've had them on the phone, and it's like two totally different people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes you have to catch them at the right time as well. So yeah, it all varies. But there's nothing worse than, for instance, you have a Heyman, like, you know, an all-time interview really to have on your record, and that you don't quite get what you want. I'm not saying that. I actually enjoyed my one with Heyman, but as an example, you know, if you get hold of a Triple H or Roman Reigns and it isn't what you want it to be, and they're not in the mood, like that sucks.
Yeah.
It's annoying enough, and that was the thing as well. That it hasn't happened yet, but,
Thankfully.
But when we started, you know, knock on wood. But when we started doing interviews, and you know, when we started kind of thinking about wrestlers and stuff, like, it's not something we discussed, but it was something always in the back of my head, being like, what if they want to do this in kayfabe? Do you know what I mean? It's like, and then I was like, yeah. So I thankfully that hasn't happened yet. Thankfully they've been fairly, every wrestler we've had on has been really good and really great and really obliging.
I think what you actually said about them being WWE is a crucial point as well. Like, if you speak to independent wrestlers or something like that, they have like.
Yeah, they
more protect, I guess. Yeah, it depends what their character is too. Like, look at Sasha Banks right now. I'd love to speak to Sasha Banks, but not right now, because she would just give you the same. You know what I mean? She just by you and do the whole, you know, thank you, Vince McMahon, all that stuff. So it's like, yeah, you got to pick your spots, I think.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask about, in terms of a difficult interview, and I watched some of the interview and I thought you did a fantastic job, and it was your interview with MJF.
Oh yeah,
because I could only imagine how difficult that interview can be, because he'll just come on. He's another one of those guys that will control the interview and do what he wants and say what he wants.
Yeah.
So how was that?
I don't want to break kayfabe too much for him.
Yeah.
But there's a brief window before we go on where we met and talked to him, and he's not that bad. But he did say basically, once we're on live, to quote him, he said, you know, you're fucked. So I was like, oh, well, all right. You just got to, you know, that's part of the entertainment though, isn't it? You have to kind of say, all right, cool. But he was up for anything. The perfect guy in that scenario, really. In terms of navigating the interview, it's exactly what you just said about kayfabe. You're not going to get him to say, you know, who was behind this or what, you know, or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. So you have to have as much fun with it as you possibly can. And you know, apparently having a pube chin is as fun as it can get. It was cool though. I'm glad we did it. And I've got to meet him and stuff. Because at the end of the day, the guy is going to be a huge star in the industry. And I do think, as you said, he's so good at what he does. So yeah, it was great. I mean, I don't know if I classify it as an interview, to be fair.
More like a roasting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that's what makes MJF great though, that he's one of those kind of old school heels that just won't, he's never going to drop his guard. He's always going to be, you know, at the top. Literally, he's going to be MJF 24, or at least whenever there's fans around, whenever there's cameras on, and literally, I mean, we've had experiences with MJF, and literally it was such an indirect experience as well, but he still managed to get at me. But so we were on an OTT show, right, and he was wrestling on the show, and we were in line to get merch and talk to some of the guys as well. We were in the line for Will Ospreay, and MJF was 2 people over, and I was in a trance. I was literally just looking around going, geez, look at all these wrestlers. And then I looked over at him and he was staring at me. He was literally just staring at me, and we locked eyes, and I was just is he staring at me? and then he flipped me the bird, and I was just oh, and I gave it back to him. and then he just went about his day, and I was just all right, okay, that's an experience, I guess.
Yeah, he literally just said to me, because we only had about 30 seconds before we went on air anyway, and he was just oh, we've got the niceties out of the way, and like I said, he just said, when we're live, I was all right. And that was that. So, yeah, I think you're right, though, and I think that's part of his charm and his luster is that, he cannot be broken. He is who he is, fully committed. Yeah, it'll be great one day when he does like podcasts when it's all said and done, and everyone will be like, yeah. But I do appreciate it about him.
Yeah, no, you have to. I mean, like he is one of those guys who just he's going to be one of the faces of the business for years.
A long time. Yeah.
Yeah. You know.
Another thing I wanted to ask as well is, and I'll keep this in the positive sense. Was there anyone who you've interviewed that actually surprised you positively that you might have had like that there might be a common misconception about them prior to the interview?
I mean, positive and negative, to be honest. I've really been lucky. I haven't had too many like car crash interviews. Like none that I'm like, oh, that was just dreadful. Or I remember I tried doing early in my career when I went to like the junkets and stuff, and I was working for Give Me Sport. It's very much a very different like line of questioning. Like now, obviously, I'm the editor and I can decide what we're going to do, and I have specific kind of wrestling orientated questions. I feel like I ask questions that fans like me would want to know. That's kind of like the gambit.
Yeah.
But back then it was more social stuff. So you're trying to do stuff that on video will work and people will share. So you're trying to make it funny, and like sometimes it just isn't, or they're not in the mood for it. Like we used to do this 60-second thing where you just do quick fire questions. We tried to do it with Shinsuke Nakamura and he could barely speak English. It was just dreadful. We also did there was one that was called Twitter versus WWE, and essentially it's like, you know, you've seen it before, where fans write rubbish on Twitter about WWE stars, but we would blank who the name was, and then other WWE stars had to guess who the fans were crucifying, basically. Right? In principle, sounds very funny. With New Day, great, really great. Right? Tried to do it with like Samoa Joe. Again, like I said earlier, like 7:30 in the morning. He just was not finding it funny. The same as we tried Rusev later on, who was a funny guy, by the way.
Yeah.
And he wasn't feeling it either. He was just like, what? And sometimes in those press junkets, right, it's not like you have a lot of time with them. You have like 5 minutes. So it's a lot of stuff to fit in. And you're trying to be like, you know, you don't really know them, but you're like trying to make something funny with them.
Yeah.
You know? I just kind of learned like that's not the time or place for them. But at the time, I was being told what to do, and you try and make the best of it you can.
Yeah.
And I've had both of them, by the way, since Samoa Joe, particularly last Royal Rumble. No, 2020 Royal Rumble. Great guys. Great when you sit and chat to them, but you're trying to, you're like, be funny, not so much. In terms of positive, there's been a ton of like great heels that I've spoken to who are just like the loveliest people. Do you know what I mean? Rhea like that. I know she's a face now, but I was speaking to her when NXT UK, you know, when she became the inaugural champion, she just like proper Dakota Kai's first bad knee injury. No, not Dakota Kai. Tegan Knox, first bad knee injury. And Rhea was the one in the ring, right? And I asked her about it, like, how did you sell that? Like, obviously she's terribly worried for what happened to Tegan.
Yeah.
And she was just, again, like the nicest person in the world. There's loads of examples like that. And probably, there's some of them who are just like the nicest people on earth. Like Becky Lynch is everything you ever hear about her. She is super, super nice. Like, out of her way nice. I don't think that there's been anyone that I've been like, oh no, I have to speak to this person. And then it wasn't anything positive. Because you have to remember, it's in their interest for it to be good. And I think, you know, if a WWE as well at this point, they're so media trained that, you know, they know what they have to do. I've had a couple where it's like, man, there wasn't much out of this interview. Like, interestingly, like, a Moose is a difficult guy to get stuff out of. Some of them, you know, some of them better than others. But I would say I've never really been too surprised either way. Generally, I've had good experiences.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like you said, you kind of hope, like, you probably have that kind of confidence in the back of your head that, look, no matter how bad this might go, at least they're probably going to be professional about it, because if they look like an idiot, it's going to reflect even worse on them than it is on me. Yeah. And it's going to affect them way worse than it's ever going to affect me, really.
I mean, I think in my career as well, like I've always kind of thought that interviewing was actually my strong suit. Like, that's what got me off the ground in terms of my work. Like, how, you know, it's only a small following by comparison to some, but like to garner what I have thus far, generally has stemmed from the people I've spoken to, the lines I've gotten, and the good stuff like that. So I think that whatever I am, and I don't know what I am these days because I'm presenting and hosting and reporting and whatever, like whatever the congruent word for all of that is. I do think the backbone of what I am is interviewing. So yeah, I do every time. I'm always excited to talk to people. I'm always like anxious. I don't know if you guys are. I always get like a little bit anxious because I want it to be good. It's very different to being nervous about talking to the person. I don't ever get that, but I do get anxious. Like, yeah, I want this to go well, and then I like, for some people, you thoroughly prep the shit out of it. But yeah, I do think that that's the cornerstone of pretty much anyone who's good at this job.
Yeah, like you said, I do experience kind of similar anxiety where it's not about the actual interview and the preparation, because we do that on here and we can do that, but it's the human aspect of it where we don't know what mood this person's going to be in. We don't know like what time of the day we're kind of interrupting for them and stuff like that. So that always kind of gets me anxious then that, okay, maybe they're not going to be in the best mood. Maybe this isn't going to go as smoothly as we thought. So yeah, it's interesting that someone like yourself experiences that as well, for as experienced that you are, that it still doesn't go away.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Like, I think for the past 2 or 3 years, I've done upwards of 100 interviews a year.
Yeah.
And still, like, again, it's just a case of I hate. There's nothing worse than feeling like, to me anyway, like missed opportunity, where it's like, oh man, like I remember being on a conference call and I didn't get to speak to Randy Orton and I was fuming, like proper fuming. Like I came off the call, like, what was the point? And then like you get all nasty and you're like, why did this person get a question? Like that was a question. Why do they get one? And I'm like, maybe I won't ever get to talk to Randy Orton again. Do you know what I mean? Because he doesn't do it often. I did.
Yeah.
But at the time I was fuming. Same with I went to Fight Island, right, in January. I did a post, like a pre-fight